Well, my recollection is that when we started the campaign to change things, that we knew that people understood that something terrible had happened. I mean, what the two major culprits did, Donald Maness as borough president, Stanley Friedman as Bronx County leader. They were not part of my government, but they were independently elected, was horrendous, and caused certainly me enormous pain. I almost went into a state of clinical depression. I was so overwhelmed by what had happened. And what is interesting is that none of the law enforcement people, whether it's Giuliani as U.S. Attorney, or DOI, or Justice Department, none of them had any, or the DAs had any inkling at all as to what was happening. It was all disclosed as a result of a wiretap in Chicago, when two people in Chicago discussed what was happening in New York, and that was the basis for the ultimate investigation that uncovered the terrible criminal activity that was taking place, led by Donald Maness and Friedman. But in any event, it was such an overwhelming situation that, frankly, without remembering the details, I think we thought we would be able to accomplish what we did. Much of it I could do by executive order. I mean, I gave DOI much greater authority than it had before, and appointed someone, Ken Conboy, who was like Savonarola, totally dedicated to getting to the bottom of any illegality. I mean, he treated, as he should have, illegality like Savonarola treated heresy.
Well, when you were pressing for campaign finance reform, do you think that the other elected officials who had to be part of that process to pass a change in the law understood what they were getting into?
Well, you know, I was on the House Administration Committee that passed public financing for the President and Vice President. And there was enormous resistance to doing it. None of the congressmen, when we wanted to include also, when I say we, Bradamus, who's former president of NYU and still there, and myself, and the chairman, Wayne Hayes, who is not a very nice guy, but here he saw, I think, an opportunity to make a statement that would transcend all of his terrible past practices. We couldn't get it through. I mean, the members of Congress who served on that committee absolutely rejected the idea of public financing, and for members of Congress. They didn't care about the president and vice president. Didn't affect them. Right. But they weren't going to finance some opposition to them getting reelected. And so I had that in mind as well. But I had a very good relationship with the city council, and well, I think most people were shocked that we ultimately were able to get what we did get. I thought the combination of my good relationship with the council and the shock of the terrible criminality that had occurred could end in a victory.
Now, I believe even then there was the same question raised about whether the city council should be included in the same way that you were describing at the federal level. Was that something that was very of great concern to you, that you felt it was important?
Oh, I thought absolutely it was important, just as I supported it when I was on the congressional committee. I knew that if you didn't get it now, you wouldn't get it later.
Now, I know your administration tried to get something passed at the state level to apply to New York.
Yeah.
And they were not receptive to that.
Well, they're not receptive because they don't want it to ultimately apply to them. And
Right.
I mean, we have the worst assembly and state senate, in my judgment, imaginable. I mean, they are people who, every one of them is an autocrat and believes that each of them should have more power than the mayor of the city of New York and the running of the city of New York, and we don't have home rule under our Constitution. So enormous areas of major concern are areas that the mayor and the city council cannot do anything with unless the state legislature gives us the authorizing authority, and they rarely do.
Well, in 1988, of course, you were addressing specific things that had happened in New York City.
Yeah.
In the rest of the country, a program like this at the municipal level barely existed. Do you think at that time you had any idea that down the road the New York City system would be a model for the whole country?
I certainly hoped that it would, and I don't know how many jurisdictions currently have it. Do you?
Well, there are only 3 or 4 cities, but there are now about 10 or 20 states that do,
Good.
of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
They're not all the same as New York's, but you know, the New York City system is certainly routinely held up as the model for people to look at and work on. And even at the federal
Well, I
government,
consider it one of the major accomplishments of my administration.
How did you first? How did Joe O'Hare first come to your attention? Remember?
I honestly don't know. I knew Joe, and I don't know how it is that we were so prescient as to pick the one person who could make it work. I believe that there are very few, if any, people who would have had the ability, the respect, the courage, the intellect, the integrity needed to make this work. He, as someone said to me the other day, actually was Nat Leventhal, who had been a deputy mayor in my administration, and who is now Mayor Bloomberg's transition guy, who goes and looks for people and is looking for a successor to Joe O'Hare now that he's leaving and is finding enormous problems. What he said to me in our discussion when he asked me to suggest names was, here's a guy who made the job, and he's absolutely correct. The strength that he displayed, I always like to tell people, he find my mayoral campaign committee, and you know, I like to think, and I think it's true, that I would never, ever intentionally engage in a violation of any rule, law, my obligations as mayor, or my obligations as a candidate. It's, you know, it's very complicated, and you have a lot of people out there who handle these things, and you have a campaign treasurer who's basically the guy who's signing everything, and you have to get on your knees and thank these people for being willing to take that position. They don't get paid for it, and they endanger themselves. They're exposed to criminal liability as well as civil liability, all in a cause that they undertake because they believe in a candidate. And if it wasn't structured that way, then the candidate would be having to sign these things and be subject to criminal liability and civil liability. And so I'm very appreciative of all the treasurers that I have had. And I remember when Larry Mannlicher came in and he said, they're fining us. I think it was $25,000. I said, what? What did we do? And he says, I don't think we did anything wrong. Then don't pay it. We're going to appeal it. He said, pay it. Pay it and get rid of it. So we did. And I mean, you can't but make errors along the way. It's quite complicated. It's not easy. But this is the point of my story. We did. You know, it's like pay the $2. And then O'Hare's operation fined Dinkins. And Dinkins got so angry, he fired O'Hare. I mean, what an outrage. And I remember when Giuliani was elected, and I think the firing took place in the last month.
New Year's Eve at 3 p.m.
New Year's
Eve at 3 p.m.
Oh, so the last day. And I remember immediately calling the Giuliani people and speaking with his closest associate,
Peter Powers?
Peter Powers, and having Peter Powers come up here and getting on the phone and saying this, using President Bush's later comment, this will not stand. And we aroused the city so that Dinkins had to back down, and Giuliani made the change, and we got that guy that Dinkins put in to resign. Otherwise, we were going to put his name in large print in every newspaper as having participated with Dinkins in something that just was intolerable, unacceptable. And then O'Hare was put back in. And so now we then come to the point where O'Hare finds the Giuliani campaign. And Giuliani goes crazy and threatens O'Hare and the institution,
The Campaign Finance Board.
The Campaign Finance Board, and says he's going to close him down and move him to Brooklyn, and I mean, threatening the vilest reaction. I thought to myself, how could, I mean, the initial reaction, I'm telling you, how could they find me? I mean, we're doing our best. It's difficult. It's not easy. There's no intent. But nevertheless, you make mistakes and you got to pay. And the rules and regulations are put in so that you don't have to be limited to criminal sanctions, and you can have civil ones. But I thought Giuliani was as bad as Dinkins. But then I remember what O'Hare said, if I recall it correctly. He said he's taken on a priest who will never back down, or words to that effect. An Irish priest who can fight back.
A little bit parallel to the comments made after the Hevesy flap also this summer. You may recall they were going to sue
Right.
and O'Hare. So
Sue me. It was wonderful to behold.
Now,
I really love that guy. Just a wonderful man.
well, he served you also on your appointments committee. And
So that would be the answer
Yeah.
as to how
And-
we came to the conclusion that we should ask him.
and on your Charter Revision Commission as well.
Right. And I knew him from his position with America before he
Oh, is that right?
became the
President of Florida?
yeah.
Do you read America Magazine?
I don't anymore, but I did.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh. He may go back there, I think, and do some more writing.
Then I'll start reading it again.
Now, he told a story about being on the appointments committee. He was saying that you, unlike some others, once you appointed someone to something, left them alone.
Well, it was my style of government. My style of government was that I appointed people who I thought were the best available. I had others go out and search the vineyards, and then they bring in a number of suggestions, and I'd interview, and then I'd pick the one who I thought was the best one that I had interviewed. Once I did that, I said, I want you to use your genius, your ability. That's why I picked you. And I don't want you to do what everybody does. I want you to come up with new solutions, and I also know that some of them will fail. And I want you to know that if whatever you did was with the exercise of common sense and it failed, I'll stand with you. I don't expect everything to work out, and because I know that they will fail, and I want you to try, I want you to be assured that you're not going to be thrown out simply because something that you tried failed. And unlike other mayors, I used to stand in the blue room with every commissioner who I thought had exercised common sense, and something happened on their watch that the press, the press is very desirous of tearing down the commissioners and attacking them. And I didn't do what other mayors did, throw them to the piranha, let them fend for themselves. I would go out there, and they appreciated that, and as a result of that, they did far greater loyal service to the government because of their strength, the strength that I helped give them. Now, the other mayors that followed me, they'd throw people to the piranha, as I've said, and the mayors before me.
Well, illustrating your point about leaving them alone and letting them make their own mistakes, he said that when they were on the appointments committee, I think Floyd Abrams was the chair, and you left them so alone that, I don't remember what the position was, that they came up with a name that was so entirely inappropriate that when it was submitted to you, you broke into laughter.
Yeah.
But it didn't result in any change in the operations. Your first appointment...
I'll give you another illustration.
Please.
Since you mentioned Floyd Abrams.
Yeah.
Floyd Abrams, who I appointed to this chair to pick people for positions that had to be approved by the city council, is my recollection. They were not just regular appointments. Would be like Landmarks Commission or city planning. There were certain positions that had to be approved by the city council. Most not. Most appointments do not. When I was running for the third time in the primary, Floyd Abrams supported Dick Ravitch in the primary. I thought it was bizarre myself, and I thought that what he should do is resign. But I would not ask him to resign. If he thought that it was appropriate to stay on after he was supporting someone else against me, I was not going to remove him except at the end of the term. And then when I reviewed everybody, I was not going to fire him, so to speak.
That's a pretty extreme story. Your appointments when the board was first formed were Father O'Hare, Bob McKay, who had been the dean of NYU Law School, and Sonia Sotomayor, who's now a judge of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. It's a pretty distinguished crew.
Right.
Were you sending a message at the time?
Well, I knew that this board would be subject to attacks, and that there were people who would want to get rid of it by having it fall on its face, and therefore you had to have the best. And yes, I was sending a message that I was appointing the best people. They had my support, and we were going to make it work.